What transforms a victim into a monster? In the shadows of scientific laboratories, a brilliant mind was broken by human cruelty. Koba from Planet of the Apes isn't just a villain. He has a mirror reflecting humanity's darkest capacity for creating the very evil they fear. Tonight, we dive into the psychology of revenge, where pain becomes power and justice becomes vengeance. The question isn't whether Koba was wrong. It's whether we created him to be right. In sterile laboratories across the world, intelligence blooms in unexpected places. Koba's story begins not with evil, but with wonder, a young ape displaying remarkable cognitive abilities, solving puzzles that would challenge human children. The scientists marvel at their creation, documenting every breakthrough with clinical fascination. But beneath the surface of scientific progress lies a darker truth. Koba exists in a world where intelligence comes with a price: endless experimentation, isolation, and the constant reminder that he is property, not person. The laboratory becomes his entire universe, a place where pain is routine and comfort is earned through performance. The psychological foundation is already forming. Attachment theory tells us that early experiences shape our worldview fundamentally. For Koba, every human interaction reinforces a simple lesson. Intelligence makes you valuable, but not valuable enough to be treated with dignity. The researchers see breakthrough, but they're actually witnessing the birth of something far more complex. Dr. Sarah Johnson's notes, if they existed, might read: subject shows remarkable problem-solving abilities, but displays increasing signs of learned helplessness when faced with negative stimuli. What they couldn't predict was how learned helplessness, when combined with superior intelligence, doesn't create submission. It creates strategy. The environment shapes the mind like water carving stone. Each day, Koba learns that humans are predictable. They cause pain when it serves their purpose, offer rewards when performance meets expectations, and never, ever consider his perspective as valid. This isn't just conditioning. It's the systematic construction of a worldview where trust becomes weakness. But Harvard psychologist Dr. Martin Seligman's research on learned helplessness reveals a crucial detail. Some subjects don't just accept their fate. The most intelligent among them begin to analyze the system itself, looking for patterns, weaknesses, opportunities. Koba wasn't just learning to solve their puzzles. He was learning to solve them. The first signs appear subtle: a hesitation before following commands, eyes that track human movement with calculating precision, small acts of defiance disguised as accidents. The researchers dismiss these as natural animal behavior, but they're witnessing something unprecedented: the birth of strategic thinking born from systematic oppression. But there was something nobody saw coming. The transformation begins with a single moment of clarity, not enlightenment, but something far more dangerous: understanding. After years of watching humans justify their actions through the lens of greater good, Koba realizes that morality is simply a tool used by the powerful to control the weak. The pivotal moment arrives during what psychologists call cognitive breakthrough under stress. While enduring another round of invasive procedures, Koba's superior intelligence finally pieces together the complete picture. He understands that his pain isn't accidental or necessary. It's convenient. The humans can achieve their goals without causing suffering, but they choose not to because his comfort simply doesn't factor into their calculations. This realization triggers what trauma specialists recognize as complex PTSD with hypervigilance patterns. But in Koba's case, the hypervigilance isn't random anxiety. It's systematic threat assessment. He begins cataloging every human weakness, their predictable routines, their emotional blind spots, their tendency to underestimate his capabilities. Neuroplasticity research shows us that trauma literally rewires the brain, creating new neural pathways that prioritize survival over social connection. In Koba's case, this rewiring is accelerated by his enhanced cognitive abilities. Where a normal trauma response might create fear-based reactions, Koba develops something more sophisticated: strategic emotional detachment. The psychological shift is profound. Where once he sought approval and connection, now he sees only tactical opportunities. Each human gesture of kindness is analyzed for ulterior motives. Every moment of pain is cataloged as evidence supporting his growing thesis. Humans are the real monsters. They just lack the honesty to admit it. Dr. Judith Herman's work on trauma psychology reveals that survivors often develop negative worldview assumptions, beliefs that the world is inherently dangerous and people are fundamentally untrustworthy. But Koba's case is unique because his observations are actually accurate. The humans around him genuinely don't value his well-being, making his paranoid assumptions perfectly rational. The most chilling aspect isn't his growing hatred. It's his growing emotional intelligence about humans. He learns to read their guilt, exploit their assumptions, and manipulate their expectations. Where they see an animal learning tricks, he's actually studying their psychological vulnerabilities. The laboratory staff notice behavioral changes, but misinterpret them as increased docility and focus. They are actually observing the emergence of calculated performance, Koba, giving them exactly what they expect while gathering intelligence for future use. And it was there that everything began to crumble. The mind, once broken, begins to rebuild itself according to new principles. Koba's psychological architecture transforms from victim-based thinking to predator-based strategy. This isn't random violence. It is the systematic development of what psychologists call instrumental aggression, combined with superior cognitive processing. His daily interactions become case studies in manipulation. When researchers praise his problem-solving, Koba analyzes which responses generate the most enthusiasm, then calibrates his performance to maintain their investment while revealing nothing about his true capabilities. He's not just learning their tests, he's studying the testers. The transformation follows patterns documented in attachment disorder research, but accelerated through enhanced intelligence. Where typical cases might take years to develop trust issues, Koba processes months of relationship data in days, arriving at conclusions that would take human psychiatrists extensive therapy to uncover. Dr. Robert Hare's psychopathy research provides fascinating parallels. Koba develops what appears to be acquired psychopathy, emotional detachment born from survival necessity rather than genetic predisposition. He retains the capacity for genuine feeling, but learns to suppress it as tactically disadvantageous. The most disturbing aspect is his growing understanding of human moral blind spots. He observes how researchers justify their actions through institutional authority, how they compartmentalize ethical concerns, how they distance themselves from consequences through bureaucratic language. These observations become his playbook for future manipulation. The laboratory footage, if reviewed carefully, would reveal subtle changes. Koba's eye contact patterns shift from seeking approval to gathering information. His compliance becomes perfectly calibrated. Enough cooperation to avoid punishment, but no unnecessary effort that might reveal his growing capabilities. The psychological term, learned industriousness, takes on sinister meaning in Koba's case. He learns not just to work hard, but to work smart, conserving energy for what matters while maintaining appearances of continued dependence on human management. His understanding of power dynamics becomes sophisticated. He recognizes that humans fear what they can't control, so he presents himself as controllable while secretly developing autonomous capabilities. Every act of apparent submission is actually strategic positioning. Perhaps most chillingly, he begins to experience what trauma therapists call moral injury, the psychological damage that occurs when someone is forced to participate in or witness acts that violate their core values. But instead of seeking healing, Koba embraces the injury as evidence that traditional morality is simply weakness disguised as virtue. but the true monster was still sleeping. The final threshold is crossed not in a moment of rage, but in a moment of perfect clarity. After extensive observation and analysis, Koba reaches a conclusion that changes everything. Humans aren't flawed beings capable of growth. They are fundamentally predatory creatures who have simply dominated the narrative about morality and civilization. This realization triggers what philosophers call moral relativism through experiential evidence. Having witnessed systematic cruelty justified through institutional authority, Koba concludes that all moral systems are simply tools for the powerful to control the weak. If humans can justify causing pain for the greater good, then why can't he? The psychological shift is profound and irreversible. Where trauma typically creates reactive responses, Koba develops what clinicians recognize as cold cognitive processing, decision-making that prioritizes logic over emotional consideration. His logic is built on a foundation of systematic abuse, creating perfectly rational conclusions that lead to devastating outcomes. His worldview crystallizes around a central thesis: strength determines morality, not the other way around. The humans who harmed him weren't evil. They were simply strong enough to impose their will without consequence. Now that he's becoming stronger, their moral objections to his actions become hypocritical complaints about losing their monopoly on violence. Research on moral disengagement by Albert Bandura shows how individuals justify harmful actions through cognitive mechanisms like euphemistic labeling and advantageous comparison. Koba masters these techniques, but applies them with enhanced intelligence and perfect logical consistency. The transformation becomes visible in his problem-solving approaches. Where he once sought solutions that humans would approve of, now he seeks solutions that achieve desired outcomes regardless of human preferences. The shift from people-pleasing to results-oriented thinking marks the complete dissolution of his psychological dependence on human validation. Perhaps most disturbing is his growing sense of moral superiority. Having been subjected to systematic cruelty in the name of science and progress, Koba concludes that humans are simply better at self-deception than other species. His actions, while violent, at least carry the virtue of honesty about their true nature. The laboratory becomes his laboratory, a place to study human behavior under stress, to test theories about fear and control, to validate his hypothesis that civilization is simply organized predation with better marketing. Every human reaction confirms his evolving worldview. What makes this transformation particularly chilling is its internal consistency. From Koba's perspective, he isn't becoming a monster. He is simply acknowledging what he always was in human eyes, a tool to be used. The only difference is that now he's choosing his own purpose. But here lies the most disturbing question of all. What if, given the same experiences and the same intelligence, his conclusions are not only understandable, but logically inevitable? The terrifying truth about Koba isn't that he is insane. It is that his reasoning is perfectly sound within the framework of his experiences. Cognitive psychology research on schema formation shows how early experiences create mental templates that filter all future information. Koba's schema, built through systematic abuse disguised as scientific progress, creates a worldview where violence isn't pathological, it's adaptive. Neuroscientist Dr. James Fallon's research on psychopathy reveals that brain structure, combined with environmental factors, determines behavioral outcomes. In Koba's case, enhanced cognitive abilities combined with systematic trauma create something unprecedented: a highly intelligent individual whose moral reasoning has been systematically corrupted by exposure to institutional cruelty. The most chilling aspect of his psychology is its predictive accuracy. Koba's assumptions about human behavior, that they prioritize convenience over ethics, that they justify cruelty through institutional authority, that they fear losing control more than causing harm, prove correct in every subsequent interaction. His paranoia is actually superior threat assessment. Studies on complex trauma by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk demonstrate how prolonged abuse rewires the brain's threat detection systems. But Koba's enhanced intelligence allows him to process trauma data with unprecedented sophistication, creating survival strategies that transcend typical fight-or-flight responses into comprehensive strategic planning. What emerges isn't traditional villainy, but something more disturbing: rational evil. Koba doesn't harm others because he lacks empathy. He harms them because he has calculated that mercy is simply tactical disadvantage in a world where power determines survival. His actions follow perfect internal logic built on empirical observation of human behavior. The laboratory environment becomes a perfect case study in what Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil, how ordinary people participate in systematic harm through institutional structures. Koba observes this process from the victim's perspective, gaining insights that would take human sociologists decades of research to understand. Perhaps most disturbing is how his enhanced cognitive abilities allow him to predict human responses with frightening accuracy. He understands that humans will rationalize their past treatment of him while condemning his current actions, demonstrating the exact moral inconsistency his worldview predicts. Research on moral psychology by Jonathan Haidt shows how different groups prioritize different moral foundations. Koba's experiences have systematically demolished trust in authority, sanctity, and loyalty, leaving only concerns about harm and fairness, but applied with rigorous logical consistency that humans rarely achieve. The result isn't madness, but something more frightening: perfect sanity applied to an insane situation. Every decision follows logically from previous observations. Every action serves strategic purposes within his carefully constructed worldview. It wasn't madness. It was cold calculation. In the aftermath of Koba's transformation, we're forced to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of evil, justice, and moral responsibility. His story doesn't end with his physical presence. It continues in every laboratory, every institutional system, every moment when power justifies harm through acts greater goods. The psychological legacy is profound. Koba represents what happens when institutional trauma meets superior intelligence, not breakdown, but breakthrough into a worldview that challenges fundamental assumptions about morality, civilization, and human nature. His actions force observers to question whether evil is inherent or created. Research on intergenerational trauma shows how traumatic experiences echo through communities and across time. Koba's impact extends beyond individual victims to challenge entire systems of thinking. He forces other apes to choose between the comfortable illusion of human benevolence and the harsh reality of systematic exploitation. From a philosophical perspective, Koba embodies what Nietzsche called beyond good and evil, not the absence of moral reasoning, but reasoning that transcends traditional moral categories. His intelligence allows him to see through cultural constructs that most individuals accept without examination. The most unsettling aspect of his legacy is how it reveals the arbitrary nature of moral authority. The same institutional systems that justified harming Koba now condemn him for responding with violence, demonstrating exactly the kind of moral inconsistency his worldview predicts. Who has the authority to judge when the judges have systematically violated their own stated principles? Dr. Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments demonstrate how ordinary people commit harmful acts when directed by authority figures. Koba's story inverts this dynamic, showing what happens when the victim of systematic authority develops the intelligence and opportunity to reverse power structures. Perhaps most disturbing is how his transformation illuminates the narrow line between civilization and controlled savagery. The humans who shaped Koba weren't monsters. They were ordinary people participating in institutional systems that normalize cruelty through bureaucratic distance and scientific justification. The cycle continues because the conditions that created Koba persist in every system, where power operates without accountability, where institutional authority justifies individual harm, where intelligence is cultivated without wisdom, and where victims are blamed for the predictable consequences of systematic abuse. In the end, Koba's story isn't really about apes versus humans. It is about what happens when trauma meets intelligence, when victims develop the capacity for strategic response, and when systems of power create the very threats they claim to protect against. The question isn't whether Koba was right or wrong. It asks whether we're willing to examine the systems that made his conclusions logical, his worldview rational, and his actions predictable. But perhaps he won't be the last. Koba's legacy lives in every laboratory, every institution that justifies harm through progress, every moment when power creates its own opposition. His transformation reminds us that evil is unborn. It is carefully cultivated through systematic indifference disguised as necessity. The real horror isn't that monsters exist, but that we create them while maintaining moral superiority. Look around. How many Kobas are we shaping today through our comfortable distance from consequences? The cycle waits to begin again.